There's a castle deep in the forests of modern-day Slovakia, its walls crumbling with age. But within the cold stone walls once lived a noblewoman. She was beautiful, and yet also feared. Countess Elizabeth Bathory, or the anglicised version, Elizabeth Bathory. She would become known as Countess Dracula. Born in 1560 to one of the most powerful families in Hungary, Elizabeth Bathory was a well-educated young girl, fluent in Latin, Greek, German and Hungarian. She was guided in a way befitting of her noble bloodline. Besides a family influence within Hungary, they controlled much of Transylvania, and Elizabeth's uncle, Stefan Báthory, was king of Poland. At the age of 11, such was the norm among noble families back then, she became engaged to 14-year-old Count Ferenc Nadasdy. The Nadasdy family had both wealth and influence in Hungary, and in such a society, the couple were the perfect match. 4 years later, on May the 8th, 1575, Báthory married Nadasdy, and Ferenc adopted the maiden name of Elizabeth. You see, the name Báthory had far more clout and honour than the name Nadasdy. In an age of family allegiances and local conflict, an esteemed family name was a great source of value. To celebrate the union between these two noble houses, Ferenc's family gifted the 13th century Czachista castle to the newlyweds. So their new life began, and the couple moved to Nadasdy Castle, the spiritual home of the Nadasdy family. And over the following years, Elizabeth and Ferenc were to have 4 children. Sounds all very perfect, really, doesn't it? Perhaps it was for them. However, there's a much darker and more sinister layer to this story. Ferenc was to become a notable military figure in Hungary, earning himself the nickname the Black Knight. And as a military man in the late 16th century, it's safe to assume that he would have been quite accustomed to the sight of brutality and blood. And what we consider horrific today was probably very normal for Ferenc. The influence of this cannot be underestimated. And in what can only be described as sick entertainment, Ferenc began to school his wife in the obscenities of human torture. And so it's alleged that Nadasdy Castle would become a location for all manner of atrocities. One account states that in a game developed for Elizabeth's pleasure, Ferenc had a servant girl restrained, lathered in honey, and left with insects swarming upon her convulsing body. Ferenc was normalizing the infliction of pure sadistic pain on others, and by all accounts, Elizabeth was enjoying it. It is recorded that Ferenc was away on military duty for much of his marriage, doing his bit to help fight off the imperialistic ambitions of the Ottoman Empire. And so, Elizabeth had much time to herself. But Ferenc would still encourage his wife to take pleasure from inflicting fear and pain, even gifting the Countess spiked gloves that would be used to thrash servants who made mistakes. It is believed that further corruption came from Elizabeth's Aunt Clara, who introduced her to a shadowy circle of people who apparently claimed to be witches, sorcerers, and the like. In January 1604, whilst away on military duty, Ferenc Nadosti died suddenly of an unknown illness. The power couple of 16th century Hungary was no more. Erzsébet took control of their extensive estates, and such was her wealth, it appeared that she was now untouchable. And so Erzsébet ruled the estates alone. But what grew from the loss of Ferenc wasn't loneliness or mourning. It was hunger. Ferenc's sadistic influence seemed to envelop Erzsébet from beyond the grave. As had been the case for many years, it all began with discipline. A servant made a mistake. Erzsébet struck her hard. Blood spilled. And in that moment, something awakened. They say she saw her reflection smeared in red and believed the blood made her skin more youthful. They say she smiled. They say she wanted more. Young girls began to disappear. Peasant girls brought to the castle under the promise of education and work. They were never seen again. Rumour spread like rot. They spoke of torture needles, pushed under fingernails, girls starved, burnt, and whipped until their flesh fell away. They spoke of screams in the night and blood running down stone walls. Some said she bathed in it. Others said she drank it. Rumour would describe Erzsébet Bathory biting and burning flesh. Some of the attacks were of an intimate nature. But it wasn't only peasants who began to go missing. The daughters of minor nobility were also disappearing, invited for training and education, but never seen again. Word spread quickly across the land until it reached the Lord Palatine of Hungary. And then on December the 29th, 1610, a certain Count George Torrizo arrived at Czachista Castle, determined to investigate the Countess's alleged crimes against women of noble birth. Peasants were of no concern to the authorities, but the disappearance of minor nobility, now that was a crime. Accounts tell of Count Torrizo arriving unexpectedly and catching Erzsébet in the middle of torturing a victim. Erzsébet was immediately imprisoned in her home, and because of her high status, this meant she was spared the indignity of being jailed as a common criminal. Early January 1611, court proceedings started. Torrizo found witnesses. Servants gave confessions. Erzsébet Bathory did not go on trial, but her estates were confiscated, her position gone, and she was walled up inside Czachista Castle. Her home was now her prison. A small drafty room, solitary confinement. That was her existence for another 4 years, until her death in 1614. She was buried in a crypt on the family estate, and then her body went missing. So what we know is that Erzsébet Bathory was accused of a litany of crimes against female servants and noblewomen who'd come to her for education and training. We also have information about her married life to Ferenc and reports of their passion for torture and inflicting pain. Yet there's very little information about murder from this time. Most of the alleged murders seem to have taken place once Erzsébet is widowed in 1604. Depictions of Erzsébet often mention her bathing in the blood of victims in an attempt to recapture her lost youth. But the first mention of bloodbaths came 100 years after her death. So unless it was deemed not that important to mention before her incarceration, it appears that someone was sensationalizing the incident at a later date. The evidence against Elizabeth Bathory certainly has flaws. Of 289 witness accounts, more than 250 of them were apparently hearsay statements, something that would never really stand up in a court of law today. There's also the fact that the servants' confessions were made under torture. Again, not exactly the most reliable source. And then in 2023, an interesting take on the events was published in the book The Blood Countess. Author and Cambridge University academic Annouchka Bayley investigated Elizabeth Bathory's story over a 4-year period. Dr. Bayley concluded that accusations against Elizabeth were false. In fact, rather than being an evil psychopath, the Countess was a book printer, book smuggler, and a radical feminist who used her vast wealth and castle home to educate vast numbers of young women, which I suppose would make her a prime target for a 17th century witch hunt. Yeah, most men wouldn't like that in those days, would they? Dr. Bayley also doubts how it was possible that she could kill 650 young women, mentioning that not one body has ever been recovered from the grounds of Czachista Castle. Dr. Bayley claims that the 650 missing women belong to a particular class, who were essentially the indigenous people of the region before the Hungarians had taken control. So essentially they were young women from noble descent, but they'd lost all of their family estates, and they were unmarried. They were lost teenagers. Dr. Bayley believes that Elizabeth Bathory, rather than killing all these young women, had set up an institute to teach them how to read and offered them sanctuary. Apparently, records show that Elizabeth spent a fortune on clothes from Venice. Dr. Bayley believes for her students, and that the girls were actually smuggled out of the castle in coffins to safer areas within Europe. Again, there are records of coffins being transported from the castle during this period. Another school of thought is that Báthory was set up by the Palatine of Hungary to steal her wealth and cancel debts that Habsburg Emperor Matthias owed to Elizabeth. These debts were incurred due to the financial and military assistance the empire had received from Ferenc Nadorsti. But since he was dead, Elizabeth had no protection, and so the authorities made their move. Elizabeth Bathory did have vast estates worth a fortune. She also came from one of Hungary's most powerful Protestant families in eastern Hungary, which of course was very unsettling for the Catholic Habsburg Empire. So, again, it's a good enough reason to relieve her of her wealth and power, isn't it? And yet, there is no smoke without fire. There is some record of Elizabeth Bathory and her husband Ferenc torturing young girls. But the murder of 600 plus? And also, well, there's always mention of Czachista Castle. But Elizabeth Bathory owned many estates, and in fact, there are some along Hungary's borderlands with a direct connection to her, such as Berg Lockenhaus in modern-day Austria. Additionally, at the time, the peasantry and poor were powerless. Their lives were largely at the aristocracy's mercy. Elizabeth Bathory would have been able to prey on those who were not ethnic Hungarians, and many peasants would have worked on her estates. Elizabeth Bathory could have done pretty much anything she wanted. And due to her wealth and position, it's very plausible that Elizabeth Bathory could commit murder and have bodies disposed of. Such a powerful woman could have easily had a group of loyal, trusted members of staff who could take care of things for her. And finally, which I guess is quite fitting for a woman who was given the name Countess Dracula, her body. It disappeared from the family crypt. The resting place unknown. Countess Dracula. That's kind of creepy, isn't it?